Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to talk about how I budget my 27k salary as a 23-year-old trying to save for a house. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I wanted to make this video because obviously I feel like there's always people that are going to judge, and I feel like people would be like, oh my god, she went to Oxford but she only earns 27k, like what a loser. So I didn't make the video for a while, but here I am making the video anyway. So I want to be super clear that this was my budget when I used to live in a studio apartment by myself. If any of you have seen my recent vlogs, then you know I'm currently living at home with family, so this is my budget from a couple of months ago. And I just want to add a disclaimer that this was my lifestyle and my budget, and obviously I'm trying to save for a house. This is not a recommendation or advice or anything like that for you guys. This is just how I used to live for the last year. And when we get to the numbers, you'll realize having a budget on a 27k salary is pretty tough. So I thought it'd be interesting to show you guys how I'm trying to save for a house on such a low salary. So let's get into the video. So the way I like to think about my budget is using the 50-20-30 rule. If you guys haven't heard of this, it's essentially where you spend 50% on your needs, 20% on your savings or your long-term savings, and 30% on your wants. So as we go through my budget, I'm going to categorize all of the expenses into these three categories. Honestly, I low-key enjoy budgeting and I look forward to doing it every month. I feel like a lot of people wait for their salary so they can go out and spend it, but I feel like I wait for my salary so I can go out and do my budget. I use an app called YNAB to do my budget, and honestly it's a bit fancy and I feel like you could just use a normal spreadsheet, but if you haven't heard of it, it's basically an app where you can do your monthly budget. What I'm going to do is a monthly breakdown. So my 27k per month is around £2,250. Straight away I pay my pension, which is around 4% of my salary, so this works out to be around £90. And as a side note, my company is also contributing to my pension and they contribute around 8%. Next we have tax, so I'm paying the basic rate above the threshold, so this works out to be around £235. And I'm also paying national insurance, and this works out to be around £94. My company also have like a well-being scheme where you get an extra £100 per month. I get an extra £100 before tax added onto my salary, so this works out to be around £80 extra per month. So my take-home pay is around £1,910, but I'm just going to round this to £1,900. So let's start off with the 50%, which is on my needs. So going on strong, we're going to go with rent first, and I spent around 823p on rent for a studio apartment living by myself. Honestly, the apartment was pretty nice. I can't complain. It was recently refurbished and the maintenance was kept to a good standard. But obviously spending so much money on rent just feels like a scam, so I wasn't happy about that. But obviously there are some upsides to renting because it gave me the flexibility to move to a new city for work. But there's so many downsides which I'm not going to go into. My next category in the 50% is food, and I spent around £300 on average. To be honest, towards the start of living alone, I was spending around £350 on food, and then I got that down to around £250. So I'm going to go with the average of around £300 per month on food. I don't know if this is a lot, but that's how much money I spent on food. So this was groceries, eating out, and also any random things you buy from the grocery store like hand wash. When I was talking to my sister, she was like, that's a lot of money. So I don't know if that's a lot of money, but guys, let me know in the comments how much you spend and if you think I was spending too much. But honestly, I feel like it was pretty decent, and I did cook a lot of food at home and I didn't eat out that much. So, but honestly, I feel like it was just a decent amount, and that's how much it just worked out to be. So next we have travel, and this is my travel to work, my commute in the mornings, but also my travel home to see my family and to see some friends. So actually this varied month to month depending on how often I saw my family and friends, but it was around £100 to £200, so on average around £150. On my actual commute, I spent £40 per month on buses, and the rest of the money was on trains to see my family or friends. For me, seeing my family is pretty much an essential cost, so that's why it's in this 50% category, and I haven't lumped it up with wants. The next category I have is my mobile phone, so I'm spending around £10 per month for like my minutes, my calls, and my data each month, so I'm getting around 10 gig of data for roughly £10. It's like £9.40 44 or something like that. So the next category I have is toiletries, and to be honest, as I mentioned before, a few of those things I was buying in my groceries, so it's under that category. So things like hand wash and creams and things. So in this category I only budgeted around £10, and that varied month to month depending on what I needed. So let's move on to the 30%, which is my fun money or my wants. So the first category that I have in my YNAB is for clothes, and I don't really know why I have that category because I did not spend a single penny on clothes. A lot of my clothes are secondhand or gifts, and if you ever see me wearing something nice, it's a gift. In the last year, I actually spent £80 on some jeans from Levi's, and I felt so bad I returned them a few days later, but literally I don't spend any money on clothes, so in this category I had nothing budgeted. The next category I have is gifts, and this varied on month to month depending on what birthdays they were. So each month I just put in £10 and then spent it as I needed. And finally, in this category we have holidays. So I knew I was going to go on a trip to Australia for around 3-4 weeks. So throughout the year I was budgeting for that. So I put around £150 into that category each month to save for my Australia holiday. So I ended up going to Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne, and I spent around 2.5 to 3k, and if you haven't already, be sure to check out those vlogs. So now the really fun part, I'm going to talk about my long-term savings, which is the 20% of the 50-20-30 rule. So it's always been my dream to have a house, so my savings are me saving for a house, but obviously a lot of people have different savings for different things. Maybe people are using these long-term savings for a car or something like that, but for me personally, I'm saving for a house. So I'm being a bit extreme here because in the 50-20-30 rule, the 20 is meant to be all of your long-term savings, including your pension, but I'm saving an extra 20% on top of that. So out of the 27k salary, 20% would be £450 per month going into my savings. So at the end of the year, I should have £5,400. Obviously, as I mentioned before, I actually ended up spending 2.5 to 3k on my Australia holiday. So actually in the couple of months before my holiday, I didn't put anything into my savings. So at the end of like 1 year of this budget, I had around £4,500 saved. So yeah, that's the breakdown of my budget, and I think if you add it all up, it roughly adds up to £1,900. So that's how I spent my money for the past year when I was living alone. And honestly, just my thoughts on like having this budget on a 27k salary, it's really tough and really hard. And actually, if you calculate the percentages, I'm actually spending around 70% on my needs, 10% on my wants, and 20% on my savings. So actually long term you can get burnout from having a budget like this. But obviously on a 27k salary, there's not much you can do with your budget, and if you have priorities and things, sometimes you can't get away with having more money on your wants, and all of it ends up going into your needs or your savings. So I lived like this for 1 year. I rented out an apartment and lived by myself on this salary, but obviously it was a short-term thing for me, and I knew that in the long term I would get a higher salary and I would be moving back home to live with my family. So I think that's one of the reasons why I managed to live on this budget, but otherwise I think I would have found it really difficult. So what do I do with the £4,500 at the end of the year once I've saved it up? I basically stick most of it into a LISA, which is a lifetime ISA. If you guys haven't heard of that, it's basically a scheme set up by the government to help people buy houses. So I put in around £4,000, which is the maximum every year. And then the extra savings that I have, I literally just stick it into Vanguard, into a normal ISA. This is the budget that I've lived on for the last year. Obviously my budget now is a bit different because I'm living at home and actually my salary has changed. I hope this video was interesting to watch, and I'm so interested to hear what you guys think about my budget, so let me know in the comments. I think I'll end the video here, so thanks everyone for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.